Alrighty, so I'm gonna just do some really quick housekeeping before I introduce the esteemed guest of the hour. We have a chat for you all to talk to each other with, share best practices, get to know each other. We'd love to see some chat and some engagement there. And for this presentation that we have, we definitely are absolutely encouraging questions. And so we have a dedicated Q&A section at the end, but don't let that hold you up. There's a Q&A module within the Zoom webinar. And so if you're able to put your question there, we will be able to see it, Steve and I. If it's in the chat, we may kind of miss it. We'll try to get that fed into us as much as possible. So please try to use the Q&A function itself, and we will absolutely get to your questions. All right. And so without further ado, I'm honored to be talking about the state of agentic commerce adoption with none other than the man that you all know and love, Steve Norris. Steve, welcome.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody. Excited to really talk about the great work that Bryce, you and team have done in understanding the ground level reality of what's happening in agentic commerce.
Great. There's so much going on in agentic commerce, and we took to the streets and surveyed folks to get an understanding of it. And so we ran a research report, which everyone will get emailed to you if you've not already downloaded it before. And so don't worry, you'll get it. There's also a portion of the slide to go capture that for yourself. And so we talked to 600 enterprise retail executives, mainly based in the US, to talk about their sentiments, their plans, their ideas, and really just the future of agentic commerce throughout 2026 and 2027. And so we have some benchmarks on that. We have some great things to unpack for you. And that was conducted through mid-sale research that we did that. So it is a 25-page report. It's pretty meaty. It's, like I said, segmented very well across multiple segments of commerce. And we would love to dive in. We won't dive super, super deep. There's so much to unpack in there. Really going to hit the highlights with you all. And Steve is here for the conversation of what does that mean? What's he hearing as he talks to folks? How does that resonate? And we think we've curated like the top takeaways for everyone. And again, hopefully this starts a great discussion. Please use the Q&A module to ask us so we could further delve into areas of your individual interest and expertise. And let's get going. And so just to start off, when people say agentic commerce, I'm sure you've seen on social media and the news, all kinds of definitions. We talk about agentic and what does that really mean? And so to start off, as we talk about it, retailers, companies, merchants, brands have all kinds of business models. So we're not really just looking at direct B2C only for this scope of the survey. We have B2B. And when we say B2B, it doesn't have to be large distributors, building materials, like a very small subsegment. There's so many channels, there's so many ways to get your valued products out to consumers, and now more and more through LLMs and through agentic surfaces. And so we do have this hybrid approach that we've seen in a lot of the research. Steve, any add on for that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is like as we went out and surveyed folks, we wanted to make sure we got a broad swath of enterprise retailers and brands and how they think about their business. I think, as we start to, as we've started these conversations with retailers and brands, it's interesting because many times, like B2B parts of a retailer or brand business tend to be like technology laggards in some areas, but it was interesting to see, Bryce, in some of the reporting where B2B was starting to think about adopting some of these. So I think a lot of people are finding, a lot of different parts of an organization are finding value in this agentic commerce journey.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. All right. And so again, when we say agentic commerce, a lot of times folks are talking about perhaps the most advanced form of agents buying from even other agents. And so as part of the survey, when we asked about AI readiness and implementation currently of agentic commerce, a lot of enterprise retailers were pointing to the fact that, hey, in terms of AI initiatives within the company, in terms of being AI powered as a retailer, 95% are already there. Now, that could be as small as product enrichment. That could be a kind of conversational bot on your e-commerce site to really just drive higher sales. And so this 95% just said that we've already got here. Thankfully, the last 3-4 years of AI innovation have given retailers more and more tools in their disposal than ever before to really drive that forward. As we go into sort of, for some, the dream state of how advanced that could be, we'll start to parse this down and see that the 95% quickly drops to 50 or 20 or even 10% in some areas. Steve, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting when I started looking at the report and it said 95% of retailers and brands already had at least one AI commerce capability. Like, I started somewhat laughing about that at first, Right? I was like, this seems like a stretch. Like, how many rocks did people have to look under to find the one AI-driven commerce capability that they have, right? But then I started thinking about it a little bit more, and as I was talking with, quite a few of the enterprise retailers that we work with, my gut feeling was they started to answer some of these questions about things where AI has been involved in for a while, right? So things like personalization, things like product recommendations, these are areas of commerce that have AI embedded it for a little while, right? I think the other thing that's interesting in this dynamic, just to bring this into kind of conversations that are actively happening in market, is there's a lot of organizations that I talked to in 2025 that had a board level mandate to do something, right, around agentic AI and AI driven commerce. And that something wasn't always well defined. It was like, hey, we got to do something. So people were looking for kind of quick wins. So maybe I shouldn't be so pessimistic about this 95% number. Actually, it's probably fairly realistic. But a lot of what I saw in 2025 was people in like this agentic AI commerce pilot hell, which I think in some of the research, Bryce, that you guys have been doing in this particular area and in this survey, I think we'll find out that maybe we're not in pilot hell anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And, to some degree, on the worst of days, folks did that to check the box. I'd be surprised at how many boards and C-suites did not hand down some initiative in the last 2, 3 years of you've got to get yourself AI ready. And so to agree that's there. And that's the beauty of parts of the survey that you'll all get or have seen already of how do we parse that down? Like what is sort of checking the box, what's sort of table stakes versus what, would make you less of a laggard and more of an innovator? And what does the future hold? Like where do people see things going? And exactly to that point, Steve, that you just point out, a lot of this probably has come top down. And as we talk to folks, I was maybe a bit surprised at the 12% finding here, but from what we just talked about, this has been driven very quickly. And so as we talk to folks, we're seeing more and more regularly. It's not that we're not in full-on transactable agenda commerce because we don't have leadership buy-in, or we're not exploring these LLMs or syndicating our products over to these services because of a lack of leadership. But as we all know, especially in enterprise retail, these are massive organizations. There's so many channels, there's so many considerations, so many suppliers at work, and there's a lot going on. But at least for now, we can say that the direction is clear. We'll talk a little bit more in a second about where that direction is going. But this was interesting to me to see that, it's they don't feel that they're hamstrung.
Yeah, I think, sometimes we run into scenarios operating as we do in kind of the retailer and brand space where there's a lot of things that come out in a hype cycle that we need to make sure and try to get backing or understand, like, is this a solution to a problem or is it a solution looking for problems,
Yeah.
right? And I think when you look at some of the things over the last 5, 7 years, things like metaverse, things like NFTs, right? These were all kind of what I would consider solutions looking for a problem. And when you looked at the leadership backing for some of those, I don't think you'd see only 12% there. I think you would see close to 50% in some of the things that I've looked at in the past. So this feels very much like people accepting this as a reality of the new future and not just a hype cycle that will fizzle out, just like the NFT that you invested in, Bryce.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely fizzled out for sure. Excellent. So let's put a pin on that leadership because we do have a stat coming up around investment and ROI expectations, things like that. But if the question on the 12% that you all have now is, okay, so if the leadership is not the issue, then what are these impediments to scaling agentic and LLM shopping in the near term? And so security and privacy, data quality. Sorry, these are all the same text over and over again. I can go back to the report that we have for that. Where we have a number of issues across the board. Steve, if you can speak to them from the survey.
Yeah, I think, what we've seen is like if you look at the other categories of things that are responding in the survey, about 43% said security and privacy concerns, right? And that 43%, like I hear you on this, right? Like it feels very much like people are like, okay, what are people going to do? What are these LLMs going to do with the data that I have, right? And I think some of it is, to be maybe pretty blunt, some of these LLMs have just taken data from folks without necessarily asking for permission first. And I think that's created some of these security and privacy concerns. The rest of it, I would group into lack of technical expertise and infrastructure, right? And it's not many times that you look at things like this and say, hey, infrastructure is a problem or data quality and readiness is a problem. But these agents, when they interact, they need low latency integrations and like 100% accurate information when they communicate. It's always surprising to me, like this whole concept of like data readiness. I feel like I've been dealing with people that have had poor data when it comes to products for like the last 20 years, but yet somehow this is still a problem that's not necessarily solved, right? And that's kind of where I see a lot of the realities coming into play is like, hey, people are saying, hey, I don't have real-time inventory visibility across these channels that I want to participate in. I don't have optimized product content in those channels. I don't have a headless infrastructure that I can use to really be flexible and nimble. And sometimes it's surprising to hear that because of how many digital transformations people have gone through in the last 20 years. But I don't think necessarily that all of these need to be bottlenecks for people to actually take the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And so as we look to how AI agents are going to reshape how orders happen, the sentiment is huge. Just as high as AI readiness and AI powered capabilities are at that snapshot in the survey, this sentiment of how this is going to play out is monumental and even surprised me. So I thought there'd be a little bit more skepticism now. We do have kind of a sub-segmentation. 90% plus believe that 20% of online orders will be done by 2027. And, 20% can seem kind of small, but this is coming from what percent 1 or 2 years ago, Steve? This is from
Yeah,
rock bottom.
this is astonishing, right? For historical context, in 2024, less than 1% of e-commerce sales was influenced by AI. And here we are saying that 90% of leaders expect that 20% or more are driven in that direction. It's really interesting. This, I think, was actually probably the most interesting stat to me because, like, there's a lot of in our e-commerce space, there's a lot of talking heads, a lot of people pontificating, right? There's a lot of software companies kind of positioning themselves, but enterprise leaders are saying, "Hey, this is a real thing," right? And I think that 20% aligns with some of the stats that I saw over the holiday season coming from Salesforce.
Mhm.
So feel really good that, hey, we have the technology companies and these enterprise leaders are saying the same thing, which means like there is a very pressing need, it feels like. If you are still kind of in this ideation phase, trying to figure out what to do, spending a ton of time in planning, it's probably time to take that first step, right? So,
Yeah.
because if 20% of your orders next year, right, like 2027 is not that far away, if 20% of your orders are going to be influenced by AI, are you getting that 20% or are your competitors getting that 20%? That's going to be really interesting in what, less than 8 months.
That's the name of the game. And, we have a section later on for those who maybe are either a bit in more of a wait and see category, or yes, we do feel this groundswell and we feel it's coming up, but, how do we boil the ocean? How do we get it done? And so we have a section, a little bit of how to get started, how to, if it's overwhelming of with this sentiment, how much volume is going to be going through just next year. I mean, we're talking less than 9 months, just over 9 months away. This is like right on the horizon. And the sub-segmentation here, okay, so even more than 20%, a third of survey respondents believe that AI will influence over half of transactions. So almost at the minimum, you're talking about a massive increase from just a year or two ago. That's just going to be a complete paradigm shift. And at the max, or even to some of the believers out there, it's going to be even just weightier than that, just incredible.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that 33% of people think 50% of their transactions are going to be that are going to be influenced by AI. That's pretty telling, right? That would be on the high side of things, but I
For
think
sure.
that makes me wonder, like, are people making the investments in the right thing, like if you truly believed that AI was going to influence 50% of your sales online, then there probably needs to be some budget rebalancing that happens in order to be able to, capture that type of demand.
Yeah, yeah, and let's absolutely talk about that. So I guess the takeaway being, no matter where you fall into the spectrum, I'm sure there were some respondents who thought, no, this isn't going to happen until 2029 or 2030. So if you're on that side, or if you're on this over half by the end of next year, then plan accordingly. And so what we're seeing as we talk to the respondents in the survey is that 47% of enterprises expect to invest 1 million plus in AI-driven commerce initiatives within the next 12 months. And there's a strong cohort spending more than 5 million. So it's good to see that leadership is not the blocker, that the sentiment is high and the expectations are very high for it, and that to some degree people are putting their money where their mouths are. It's if you saw a bunch of misalignment, you may be a little bit skeptical, or how are people going to pull this off? So yeah, I'm curious what you think about the level of investment, the timing, and we could talk about prior digital transformations. You've been through a million of these, from social to, I mean, we go all the way back to 2000, right, to
Yeah.
e-commerce and its birth. This has happened time and time again. This one just seems way faster. And is this enough money? Is this enough leadership direction at the right time?
I think when you look at this, I think these two stats are kind of telling of two, like they're essentially three buckets of companies and where they sit in this landscape, right? I think those people that are in that 21% that plan to invest more than $5 million, these are companies that had made some small bets in 2025, or maybe some medium-sized bets in 2025. They're seeing real tangible value. They're getting out of kind of this like agentic commerce pilot hell, right? And they're saying, hey, we're going to make investments and go because we've seen tangible value, right? I think those people that are in that 47% that are saying, hey, I'm going to invest roughly $1 million to $5 million in that are probably folks that are still trying to find their footing, right? Maybe they've done like a free pilot or something like that. They found a couple small initiatives and they're saying, hey, there's reason to believe, but I'm fairly skeptical. But I also can't be caught flat-footed and on the sidelines if, like
Right.
we talked about earlier, 20% of my online orders in 2027 are going to be influenced by AI. I can't afford to be wrong. I would put that in the $1 million to $5 million range. And, the people that are below that, right, that are just not making any investments, I would probably encourage them to start figuring out where do you take some methodical first steps so that you can start getting some learnings, so that you're not left behind.
Absolutely. And it's interesting with this particular digital transformation, there seems to be a sentiment that it's maybe not as monolithic or monumental as others. Like, I need to replace my whole website wholesale. I need to completely rip out this capability and replace it with another. It's sort of like, well, the LLMs are doing their thing. I've got my site, I've got my product data. I need to optimize in certain areas. And so as we get later on into like the next steps and how to just practically get started and don't let some of the scope and the just the sort of daunting aspect of this deter you from just getting started and moving. I wonder if this digital transformation feels a bit different, feels a bit more unique than some of the past ones we've experienced in opening new channels and going into things like social.
It's just so much more faster moving, right? Like there's plenty of statistics that people could know and reference about how many active users are being added to these LLM platforms and how quickly they've added them versus TikTok that moved really fast, and Facebook moved really fast, and this concept of marketplaces with Amazon and Walmart moved turtle slow in comparison
In
to what we're
comparison.
seeing
That's
right
right.
now. Like, it's unbelievable to me, like we talked about a little bit earlier. We've gone from less than 1% of online orders being influenced in 2024 to now people expecting 20% in 2027, or maybe even higher than that,
Higher, yeah.
right? Like that, it's incredible the pace. I've not seen things move this quickly at all in my career.
Right.
The pace of innovation in this space, the pace in which customers are adopting some of these LLMs as a way of being able to do product discovery, product comparisons, product consideration is unlike anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, it absolutely is light speed. And so with this investment, so we know that leadership is not the big blocker here. We know that folks are ponying up money to drive this forward. They expect great things and they expect this to be a sea change on the demand side and the customer experience side. And so with great expenditure comes great expectation, as we say. And so how do you think about these stats? On the one hand, expecting quick ROI, it'd be hard to sell that to investors or to others if it was a slow one. On the other hand, the space is changing, shifting so fast. This is so new to everyone. What do you think about the timeframes and the expectations on ROI?
I think this is interesting. I think we're kind of past the time from a technology perspective that people are thinking about making a investment in something that takes 5 years to pay off, right? When I first started, it wasn't uncommon for you to hear about people that are going to go through a year and a half long replatforming of an ERP system and they expect to get an ROI in 5 years and then turn around in 8 years and implement another ERP system, right? Like this is a pretty common cycle that have found themselves in over the years. I think the value around AI and being able to not only see value early on. Some of that is driven by, yes, customers are starting to look for products in these LLMs, but it's also like these AI native platforms, these platforms that also have agents that sit inside them, just allow you to get the value a lot quicker,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not that those products are necessarily cheaper in cost. They're just quicker to implement, quicker time to value that allows you to be able to drive these quicker ROIs. Because I think what we don't know is like, just like we went from 2004 to 2026 in this incredible leap, what we don't know is like anything that would be 36 months out. We barely know anything that's what's happening. As fast as AI is developing, we hardly know what's happening in the next 30 days, let alone the next 36 months.
Right, right. Where do you see yourself in 5 years in terms of agenda commerce? Who knows
Yeah.
if history has told us anything? Yeah, that's a great point. So we just talked about sort of the innovation curve, the sort of technology diffusion of innovation curve, and how fast this has been versus the prior digital transformation versus the dot-com era versus go back as far as you want. You could think about what's driving expectations in ROI and those prior eras of supply chain, like physical infrastructure, to on-prem computing and data for your e-commerce business, to cloud computing, to now LLM powered. And that curve just continues on in both senses of the word, right? It's just so much faster. All right. And so, as we had teased out before, if you are expecting a lot of LLM influenced traffic soon, if you have leadership buy-in, as we've seen across the board, most enterprise retailers have, if you're now planning investments but still it's very daunting, and as that speed of change maybe has some people on the sidelines of let's wait to see this shake out. I think we have the sense of a bit of a Wild West frontier, a little bit of a land grab, right, Steve? If people wait too long, what are the LLMs going to regard as the authority for your product category, for your assortment, for your types of products? If you jump too early, would you maybe spin your wheels in possibly the wrong direction? How should people be thinking about getting off the sidelines, getting into action while boiling the ocean, so to speak, seems very daunting to them?
Yeah, I think that there tends to be this way of thinking that's been prevalent in retail for a long time that we got to do everything in a very monolithic way, right? Like we got to plan, we got to plan, we got to plan some more, and then we got to do this really big thing, right? I think what's really interesting about how things in retail have changed even over the last 5 years is like it would be like you would have lost your job if you deployed new code onto an e-commerce site between Black Friday and Cyber Monday 5 years ago,
Right.
right? Like, just no one would do it. Now, like with these headless infrastructures and things that are happening, like it's not uncommon to see people do things like that. It's not common, but it's not uncommon
Not
either.
unheard of. Yeah.
I think the ability to be able to be very agile in this space is going to afford people the opportunity to start getting off the starting blocks and getting moving. And I think the benefits are even there in the early innings, right? So I always think about like when I'm thinking about things around agentic commerce and I'm talking with folks, like what is the smallest incremental step that you can go from off the starting blocks to at least standing up, right? First thing that I tend to look at is like, what would be the first thing that would fall apart in your existing commerce infrastructure if you needed to do something in real time and low latency?
Hmm.
Is that being able to show real-time inventory low latency? Is it a large dropship supplier network that wouldn't be able to communicate with low latency? Is it your ability to be able to route orders to a place that could do fulfillment in a more of a faster model, right? Understanding what you have and what you're working with is the first step. Right. And I don't think that needs to take too long. That could be a 14-day assessment of what do I have and what am I working with. I think secondarily, like we don't want to let perfection get in the way of progress,
Right.
right? So there are things that you can do to get some quick wins around product discovery and understanding what you have. A lot of times when I'm talking with folks, I'm talking about like, hey, let's pick a high performing category and let's start there. We don't need to worry about the catalog that you have of 2 million products. We'll worry about that at some point in our lives. But like, let's get moving in some higher volume categories, more differentiated categories, things like that allow people to be able to interact. And then it's making sure that you have the infrastructure in place that connects to your infrastructure that allows you to be able to communicate with these different protocols, with these different payment providers, with these different LLMs. So this doesn't become a monolithic task as things are changing on a daily, weekly basis with these folks. And then maybe it makes sense to think about like some optimization in that area, right? As you start to get products that are discoverable, as you start to get product content enriched and out to these various different LLM platforms, now's the time to think about like, hey, if I'm going to create a scenario where there might be exceptional demand, do I need to rethink how I do fulfillment? Do I need to rethink how I do distribution? Like, what happens if this channel takes off and it's completely accretive to my existing business? These are things that you can worry about as they start to become and surface as problems, but things that you should at least be thinking about and planning about.
Yep. Love the adage, don't let perfection get in the way of good and just to get started. So yeah, if that's helpful at all for folks to a bit get off the sidelines, it's encouraging the prior stat of 95% of enterprises employing at least one, AI powered tool or capability or function. And so clearly the innovation is there. Clearly the vision is there. I think maybe it's this next leap into true purchasing through LMs or even how to do the discovery portion. If that's the next hill to climb, so be it. But you get to choose how you do it. You don't have to just wholesale pivot the whole organization. And it's encouraging to see that there is leadership buy-in on the effort overall. Great. And so, as we think here at Logicbroker about what is needed for agentic commerce success, this is sort of our view. This reinforces a lot of what you said. How should folks think about this structure and their plans to getting started or more fully into agentic commerce?
Yeah, I think that there's a crawl, walk, run that we talked a little bit about earlier that could be followed here. But I think that you want to make sure that you have a strategy that allows you to be flexible as things start to change and evolve, right? As more of these agents start popping up, as more of these LLMs start to embrace commerce as an activity, it's going to be important to have a orchestration layer that sits between not just necessarily the LLMs and the payment providers in your organization, but also in those different areas of supply that your business might have, right? Whether those are 3PLs, whether those are suppliers that drop ship on your behalf, whether those are your fulfillment centers or stores. It's important to think about this in kind of this a more holistic model because you don't know right now what all is going to change, right? There's a
Right.
lot of shifting sands. What we don't know is if 20%, like as people suggest, is the new number of AI driven and influenced orders. What we don't know is like, is that in a creative 20% and you need to make more plans around supply, or is that partly a creative and partly not? You want to make sure that you have a platform that sits in between there that can facilitate the exchange of product content, inventory ability, pricing, and promotions across a variety of LLMs and sales channels. You'll want to make sure that you have the ability to be transactable, right? Like there are very much scenarios that we're working with and you're seeing in the market where people are transactable inside of Copilot, inside of Perplexity, inside of like the Google AI shopping. You want to make sure you have that infrastructure in place that allows you to be able to be transactable and more importantly, make sure your products are appearing where your shoppers are at,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then how do you make sure that those orders and the order updates and the financial transactions are getting routed to the right nodes that do fulfillment for your business and the right internal system?
Yep. Just want to invite the audience one more time. We have the Q&A module. Please throw some questions in. I'm gonna probe Steve just a little bit more and give you a little bit more time to enter those in. But yeah, we're about to go into our Q&A period. Steve, I had a conversation a few weeks ago, put it on LinkedIn, of just sort of like the no regrets, like the just how to get started. What would be a no regret move within the last 6 months or within the next 6 months for folks to get started on this journey? And you had some great answers.
Yeah, I think the only regret that you'll have as a retailer or brand in the next 6 months is not doing something, right? If you're still sitting on the sideline in 6 months and hoping that this, still deciding whether this is real or not real, I think that's the big regret that you're gonna have. So what can you do to get maybe a short putt win? I think it's making sure that you have the ability to be able to get your product content sent up into these LLMs in maybe more of an enriched manner. Maybe that's literally the smallest step that you could take to be able to participate, right?
Yeah.
There's probably other things that you could do, but if I think about like what is the shortest putt and where you could win, like listen, if your products aren't surfaced on these LLMs, if they're being misrepresented due to screen scraping or other activities that these LLMs are using, those are things that feel like you could be able to fix very quickly and at least get a small win while you're contemplating like what impact would transactability have? What impact does this have on my loyalty program? What impact does this have on driving store traffic? These are things that we can figure out another day.
Yeah. Yeah, and I could get the sense from a lot of folks that maybe there's this sunk cost fallacy of we've spent so much on our data on product qualities and product on the SKUs themselves. We've spent so much on the e-commerce site. Of course, the LMs are going to love us and they're going to come to us. But if you don't just take that extra step and that extra bit of work to really connect all your prior work and everything you've done into this new world of LLMs, which as smart as they are, they're just screen scraping. They're just doing things in a very rudimentary way. Like get some skin in the game, and to your point, like that would be the biggest lift, right? To not waste all of your prior effort in this new world that's a bit unpredictable at the time of how they're going to treat your product data and your brand.
Yeah. Listen, if you're an enterprise retailer or brand, like you got to make sure that your brand is protected, right? You've spent a lot of time building brand awareness. You've spent a lot of time building a brand. You may have changed your brand a couple times, right? Like that's one of the pillars that your business is built on. And if you're letting other people or other agents or LLMs be able to interpret your brand, and come up with it and address your brand in the way that they want to express that, I think that that starts to pose a challenge for businesses as they continue to move forward.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, let's open it up. Depending on what people want to talk about and have some questions, we do have some things coming through. Steve, our company is just starting to evaluate agentic commerce capability. Where do you recommend we start?
Ooh, good question. I think we addressed some of that,
For sure.
right? I still think that making sure your products are discoverable and being conveyed in the way that matches your brand and your expectations is probably the first place to start. If your brand is getting diluted by these LLMs, I think or diluted or misrepresented by these LLMs, I think you have a problem. I think what's interesting to note is I had talked to a retailer maybe 6 months ago. They said, "Hey, my brand was misrepresented on these LLMs." Actually, somebody on my board found this.
Hmm.
It said our company was popular in the 90s. Well, they're very much a real vibrant retailer today. Like, it's very interesting that the LLMs have interpreted that as, hey, they were popular in the 90s. Why wouldn't they also be popular now? It was a very interesting conversation, but
Right.
that gives you a little bit of maybe a peek behind the curtain of the actual conversations that are happening.
Yeah, yeah, little hallucination, little AI nostalgia in some cases.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, we're still alive and kicking. We're doing great today. Let's make us popular and very well loved today. All right, Steve, the next question. What's the biggest gap you're seeing between companies that are experimenting with AI and those that are actually either starting or scaling it?
I think it is, like we talked about earlier, it's not leadership that's saying, hey, don't go and do this. It's technical capabilities generally, right? Number one reason why somebody isn't moving forward is they're saying my product content isn't ready, right? Second follow-up question to that is like, what about it isn't ready? Well, it's not AEO or GEO optimized, right? Or I need to enrich it with more contextual information. That makes sense. I mean, for the last 20 years, we've been selling things online by making websites look sexy and appealing to customers, right? The challenge with that is that agents literally don't care what your website looks like, right? They're just trying to figure out pretty quickly what's the product, what's the price, what's the context, right? And what are the capabilities that you provide around that product. So that tends to be the largest gap. I think a lot of solutions that are in the market are solving or trying to solve that gap where they're saying, hey, just give me what you got and I might be able to enrich it, right?
Mhm.
And we're seeing a lot of that. We are seeing a lot of those capabilities being introduced in our platform, along with other platforms that are overall out in the market. But I think that tends to be the hesitancy. I would say people not doing anything 9 times out of 10 are saying, hey, my product content isn't ready. These were the same people that in 20 years ago were saying their product content wasn't ready for Amazon either.
Right.
We're in some ways reliving another era of commerce yet again.
It's deja vu all over again. I can only believe that someday all product data will be ready for all people around the world. Someday. But history tells us otherwise, I
Yeah.
guess I would say. Excellent. All right. Keep sending them in. This is great. We have one more, time for one to two more. So, Steve, does ChatGPT's Agentic checkout announcement impact how your business is looking at agentic commerce?
Um, you know, I I don't think so, right? I think there are a few things that when you look at the OpenAI announcement, you can take from it, right? OpenAI is structured in a way, and I've heard Fiji Simu talk about this recently about how the business, like I remember Sam Altman maybe a year ago was saying, hey, the business really operates as hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses that operate inside of OpenAI. And then I heard like a week ago, Fiji Sumu was talking about, hey, our focus is like our focus now can't be 1,000 different individual startups. It needs to be like one united focus, right? And if you look at when you look at where some of the market is going, right? People are still using ChatGPT to go and find and discover products. They just weren't checking out as now. I would
Mhm.
argue it's not I don't know that I believe that it's a consumer issue as much as it's like there's not enough products on there to be transactable to raise enough awareness. Like there's a bit of a cart and horse thing, right?
Right.
Do you need more supply or do you need demand? Like the supply side is saying, hey, there's not enough demand for me to participate, and the demand side saying there's not enough supply for me to shop. This is like the age-old dropship and marketplace mantra, right? Is it's like, okay, if you build it, will they come? Well, which side of it are we expecting to come first,
Right.
right? So that doesn't surprise me that they'll refocus their business. My gut feeling feels like that they'll be back, right? But that doesn't mean that, like, listen, when Bryce, you and I go to Google to look for anything,
Yep.
right? That doesn't mean that all of a sudden this AI summary is irrelevant. In fact, it's probably more relevant than before, right? And with some of the stuff that Google is doing around Google AI shopping, some of the things that they're doing in Gemini, I think overall these places where people traditionally would go to find things, whether that's Google or, whether that is Bing, like your traditional search areas, or whether that's Amazon. These are people that feel like maybe they're breathing a sigh of relief, right? But those are people that will continue to invest in this. Shoppers are still using this for product comparisons. I think I saw 700,000 queries a day happen on ChatGPT that
Right.
asks about products. So I'm not worried about the future of this. I think it just means, hey, maybe there's one less surface to sell on.
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of folks in this conversation have focused a ton on the supply side dynamics of this one sort of household name LLM that everyone knows and loves and what they're doing versus the demand side of the curve for browsing and discovering and attempting to shop for products, even if you link out to that e-commerce brand's website themselves to make your final purchase. That demand side is not going anywhere, and if anything, it's growing and growing. So I know that OpenAI has a lot of fish to fry. I myself have started to get ads in the platform, and so they're trying all kinds of things. They're spinning all kinds of plates, and so for now, if that's their decision, we've just seen leaps and bounds through Gemini, through Google, through all kinds of LLMs on the agentic commerce front. And yeah, it doesn't, with the survey data at our back, doesn't really give me a ton of pause in terms of the future and what direction we're headed in. Great. All right, great questions. Really appreciate everyone's participation, curiosity. Um, just FYI for those here, you will get the report emailed to you. Anyone watching this later on, or for yourself, if you want to jumpstart that, it is on our resources page at logicbroker.com. And I did want to point out one other event that we have going on. So that's Connected Commerce 2026. That is an industry event around agentic commerce. The theme for Connected Commerce 2026 is the agentic shift. That will be May 7th in New York City. Steve will be there. I'll be there. Becca, our kind host, moderator, will be there. We'd love to see you. That's also available on the website if you want to go and register. Check out the speakers, check out the agenda. One day, fully packed. We've got amazing industry experts, retailers, brands, people really living and breathing the agentic shift and how they're driving that change through their organization, how they're seeing results and seeing success. We'd love for you to join us on May 7th in New York for Connected Commerce 2026. Steve, any parting thoughts, final remarks?
I hope to see everybody at our Connected Commerce event, the Agentic Shift. Hope to see everybody there. If there's any questions you guys think about after the fact, feel free to reach out to us through the website and make sure you take a look at the report. There was a lot of work that was put into it. There's a lot of highlights in there that we didn't get a chance to get to today. So we're
Yeah,
to go download the report and see all how many pages of glory is it, Bryce?
25 pages. Yeah, this is the
Amazing.
tip of the iceberg. Yeah, we'd be here
Yeah.
for hours if we dove all the
Hmm.
way in. So yeah, absolutely. Great. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Again, Steve Norris, our Chief Customer Officer at Logicbroker. I'm Bryce, VP of Marketing. Really appreciate you joining. For those watching after the fact, I hope you gained something from this. Please reach out if you have questions, and good luck with your agentic shift. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.